Hi everybody and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. This episode, we're going to learn how to host a cannabis-infused dinner at home. My guests this week are Colin Hanner and Laura Scherb, who are going to talk me through baking their ooey gooey weed-infused chocolate brownies that are dosed to perfection. Then I'm going to feed them to some very trusting friends and hope I don't make them trip balls too hard. If you have the latest issue of Different Leaf, the magazine, handy, you can flip to Colin and Laura's brownie recipe on page 74 and bake along with us. If not, you can head on over to differentleaf.com and grab the latest issue, or find us on the shelves at your local Barnes & Noble or Books A Million bookstore. Colin and Laura's article, which starts on page 65 of our third annual edibles issue, details how to infuse each course from crackers to cantaloupe salad to pizza to popcorn. For my dinner party, I opted for their Not Your Roommates Weed Brownie recipe, which I will say was not a quick process, but it did have some really great results. It involved shopping for some really good weed at my local dispensary and preparing the buds by gently heating them for a few hours, a process called Decarboxylation, which activates the THC, and then infusing those activated buds into olive oil that I could later use to bake into the brownies. Once I had my cannabis-infused oil ready to go, I grabbed all the other necessary ingredients for brownies and I called Laura and Colin to talk me through the rest. Colin and Laura, why did you guys write this article? When did this start for you?
Over the course of the pandemic, we started, like everyone else, at first, we were doing Zoom happy hours. We were catching up with friends and drinking beers. I think at one point we actually had a birthday party for Colin that was a virtual bar crawl through some of his favorite bars, which was all great. But we realized that we were just drinking a lot in sort of this attempt to socialize during COVID. And we switched over to edibles instead.
Had you been cannabis users before that?
A little bit, but not really too regularly, and certainly not to the extent that I think we became during COVID.
So you're in Illinois, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And didn't you just get like legal rec like last year?
Yeah, it almost came out like perfect timing.
Yeah, everybody's locking down and you're like, here's lots of weed.
Exactly. But it was crazy. I mean, during the first couple months, the wait to get inside a dispensary was maybe 2 to 3 hours. You would just get a little wait ticket, sit. There's actually a dispensary just north of downtown, and you would get a ticket, sit at a empty bar across the street in the morning, and then wait till they call your name, and then you go across the street back to the dispensary and grab everything. So it was crazy. The demand was high.
I bet it was. So I guess homegrown going on at the time. Did you have to do that to get the bud for your infused dinner party?
No, I don't think we have that much of green thumbs just yet, but we grabbed some from a local dispensary and then brought it back and started doing a lot of research and then starting to cook away.
It does take a lot of research. That's what I've realized today too.
Yes. We agreed that we're both not really math people. We have done more math for the purposes of, infusion than we have in probably 10 years. So
right. There's so much maths going into this. I was looking at it and it says like 1/8 of flour and 1 cup of oil or butter will give you too much for a human to really need, but all you need from that is maybe a tablespoon, and that would be 20 to 30 milligrams. That's still like triple or sometimes 8 times what somebody needs. So when we're talking about infusing food, like we're infusing 1/8 of flour into a cup, and then we're using just a couple of drops of that oil and butter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like once we are still a couple of months removed from this, we still have the oil and the butter sitting around, and we're still not really close to being finished whatsoever. It just takes a long time, and you can't really just take a little bit of weed and take a little bit of oil or butter and make an infused mixture without it not being, I mean, that would be a waste of your time if you did that, because like you had probably done today, it probably took you 4 or 5 hours to make the infused butter, which is, it's labor intensive. It really is.
It is. It's work. I'm not going to be an edible maker after this. I realize. Yeah, God bless all the edible makers out there. They're doing the Lord's
Seriously.
work. I'm
Yeah,
not going to
yeah.
infuse my own popcorn, and yeah, no, I will pay somebody else to do this for me. This has already taken up a good chunk of day because I had to go out and buy the flour, and I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure it was good flour. And I'm having some friends over tonight who are going to eat these brownies. And while the husband smokes regularly and daily, the wife doesn't touch this stuff. So I had to find something that would be enjoyable for both of them. So it was like a lot of research into what flour it would be.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then there's like 4 hours of decarboxylating the cannabis, which I'm sure we'll get into as we discuss what all of this
Yeah.
involves. And then there's sort of the straining of it. I ended up doing oil instead of butter. But you've sort of got to cook it. There's a whole day's worth of stuff that goes into making an infused dinner. So I guess with lockdown, though, you guys kind of had the time, right?
For sure.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think before we had done this little project, had only done it a couple of times. Yeah, I mean, it takes a full day, but I mean, you can't really do it more than a couple of times without it wasting a complete Saturday.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But it's kind of like meal prepping in a way, right? Like you make a cup of oil, and then like Colin was saying, it lasts you for so long that you can kind of start experimenting with different recipes and different ways to use it and get your dosage nailed down for you, depending on what kind of flour you got. And it's a fun little project.
So I'm going to follow your recipe from the latest issue of Different Leaf, in which you have a bunch of different recipes here. And I was looking at the crackers. There's the popcorn. I ended up going for, I'm going to make today the brownies. I figured I might just infuse one thing because bless her heart, my friend who's coming over is not a canna connoisseur by any means. So like, I don't want to fuck her up, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So I figured let's do the brownies and the rest can be uninfused food and she can have a nice kick at the end.
I think that's really considerate of you. And that was something that we thought a lot about too when we were having people over. You never want to force someone to be ingesting more than they want to or feeling like they have to keep up with people who are way more experienced. So we were definitely thinking a lot about that. And I think it's great that you are too.
That's a really good point. And also, how do you choose the folks that you're going to invite over? I mean, COVID issues aside, how do you know who feels comfortable sitting around and being high with each other? Because when you get high, sometimes people don't feel super social. So how did you guys choose the group that you were going to invite?
Honestly, it was just all friends. I don't think I really don't think that we considered too much of who could be comfortable high around each other, because the people who would feel comfortable getting high would actually get high, and then the rest, maybe they'll sit it out, which is totally fine. And we had that kind of approach to this whole thing. If you want to be drinking and not taking place, go ahead, like do your own thing. If you want to be smoking or doing an edible, do it. And if you want to do either of those, by all means. So I mean, I think that like being at least a little bit open about it, which we were when we first started out this dinner, we said, hey, you don't have to partake. And people were like, yeah, that might have been a little too much, but like, thank you for letting us know. Maybe just peace of mind. So I think that's kind of how we did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think also just letting people know that, when you make your brownies, I'm sure that you'll think about the dosage there. And when we created the recipes that are in Different Leaf, we did them all so it's very easy to opt into how much cannabis you want to be having during the meal, or like Colin was saying, like opt out completely if you would rather. So even though all of the recipes in the magazine are dosed, we definitely, recommended that if someone wasn't as comfortable in this space, that maybe they start with a cracker and then wait until the final course of the brownies to take their next dose so that they weren't getting too overwhelmed.
All right, so let's get cracking with what we first do for these Not Your Roommates Weed Brownies. Nice. Okay, so I've got my oven heated to 350. So if I'm using the infused butter, I have to mix together some of the infused stuff with some regular butter, right? I don't want to use all of the butter in this recipe as infused butter.
No. Yeah.
Your
new neighbors will be quite sleepy probably by the time you get to dessert. So The reason that we're melting the infused and not infused butters together to start with, instead of just throwing everything in the pot at the same time, is because we want the infused butter to be dispersed evenly throughout the brownies, so that one person doesn't accidentally get a brownie that's going to be twice as much of the dosage that we've worked out for this recipe.
Okay.
So that's where we're starting here.
So we did mention earlier the word decarboxylation, which is really just a fancy way of saying that you gently heat your bud to activate the cannabinoids that are in the flower into something that will actually get you high, because in its raw state, weed is actually full of something called THC-A, which does not get you high. That's the acidic version of the cannabinoid. And it's not until that acidic version is heated that it breaks down some molecular chains and it turns into THC, which does get you high. So if you want your body to absorb THC when it starts the digestion process, that raw cannabis flower actually needs to be heated before it's baked into the recipe. So before you do any cooking with weed, I learned the first thing that you have to do is actually to gently heat the bud.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of different ways of doing it. If you're doing it in the oven or the crock pot, you'd bake it at about 200 degrees for like anywhere up to 5-6 hours, checking on it regularly. And when it looks like browner and crispier and it feels kind of crunchy, that's how I knew that it was activated, right?
Yeah.
To make the oil, you sprinkle that crispy bud into a cup of oil or butter in a pan. And then that activated ingredient would transfer from the plant to the oil, and then that would be my infused oil, right?
Yes.
So here's my amazing infused oil.
Oh, that looks great.
Did I do okay? I actually I used a decarboxylator made by a company called Ardent. I don't know if you've heard of these decarboxylators, but it's called a Nova Lift, and it's what she calls like an easy bake oven for weed.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, so inside you just sort of pop it in and your bud decarboxylates without like getting it too hot, because I've heard that getting it too hot really changes the effect. So you want to, when you're decarboxylating your cannabis, you want to make sure that it's at quite a low temperature, like 250.
Yeah, for sure. We actually decided to do we've done the decarb in the oven before, but we also did sous vide for this particular recipe, which we've never done before.
Now, what's that?
It's basically you seal
Steam.
something in a vacuum sealed bag, and then you put it into water. And as the water warms around it, it slowly brings things to temperature, but it's a very reliable, steady temperature.
Interesting. There's so many ways to extract stuff off this plant. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah.
How does your infused oil smell?
Let's see. Oh, it smells earthy.
Good,
really earthy.
good.
Is that a good sign?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, honestly, weed brownies are so good because chocolate is such an overpowering flavor. But once you bring some of those really herbal notes in, it tastes delicious, is what we found. So we hope that you think so too.
All right, so I'll do 3 tablespoons. So that's 1. It seems like a lot. 2 and 3. All right. And I've added that in with just over half a cup of butter.
Perfect.
Now, that does smell good, actually. That oil it's got little flecks of marijuana in it. Tastes kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yum.
Next up, melt the butter and sugar together in the microwave.
Yes.
How long do you think this should melt for?
So I would do intervals of 30 seconds, just until you see the sugars start to kind of break down and dissolve into the butter mixture. We actually don't have a microwave, so we usually do this by making a little double boiler on the stove. So just putting a pot of water to boil, putting a metal bowl on top of that, and melting everything together in there.
All right. I'm moving the butter over into a glass dish, and you said just to add a little bit of the sugar at first.
You could add all of it if you want. Just give it a good mix and then zap it for 15 to 30 seconds and see how far you get. You know, the reason that we're doing this step is to have the sugar crystals break down a little bit, and this is what gives your brownies like the really flaky, beautiful top. So the better you can melt your sugar crystals, the flakier of a top your brownies will have. And the more impressed your neighbors will be.
Right? That's what we're going for. Impress. So is one of you a chef by profession?